Go
Can I
on.
ask you, Chaz, if you're worried about, I don't know, not worried is the right word, in terms of, because we spoke about how obviously Chelsea got a really good transfer strategy, I think, in terms of how they're really aggressive in the market. They chop and change players a lot. I don't know what ripple effect that could have on the change room if you're a player that, like a Noni Madueke, for instance. I know that he's getting some bad press recently, but if you're a player in that change room and you know that literally you can get bought in the summer, but you can get sold in January, there's various players that don't know whether they are going to be Chelsea for the by the end of the summer, and Nkunku and others, and players, for instance, who've been playing in Europe but aren't playing in the Premier League, and maybe the feeling of, well, okay, I'm good enough in the Conference League playing against Noah's Ark, but I'm not good enough to play in the Premier League against the Wolves, for instance. Do you think those kind of multiple issues stemming from maybe your transfer work, maybe how the club is structuring its stuff, is having an impact on the mentality of the players and their confidence when they're going into this game, or not, essentially?
What I would say is that I think it's a mix between the both, because in my opinion, I feel like the strategy of policy could work if you're winning. And then people always ask this all the time: if you're winning, how you can have two squads? How you can have a squad on the bench, a squad that starts? I think that's an issue we'll have at the time. But for now, we're not at that stage. So for me, the players aren't good enough to warrant me worrying about them complaining about competition and playing games. Because even when they have played, like Felix, for example, he hasn't really done anything special. He ain't done nothing like out of the ordinary to make me go, yeah, you should be starting every week. And even in Nkunku, for example, he's been there for a while. He's had loads of injuries, and when he's played, he hasn't looked exceptional. So for me, that's an issue we're going to have. If everyone performs 8 out of 10, then the manager's going to be a problem. But for me, I'm not happy with the transfer strategy. I like it, but I do need to see us bring in a few more players we need. I don't mind going for a Sesko striker. But for me,
if you say that, there's a link this afternoon that Chelsea may also this window enter the race for Benjamin Sesko. That coming from
perfect.
Yeah, deal like that. Yeah. Sorry, Kunle, you were going to speak, mate.
Yeah, you see, this Chelsea thing, like, obviously, Ches, you hit the nail on the head when you talked about how as long as you lot are winning, that rotation, having two teams for different competitions and stuff, it looks really good. But in hindsight, I don't know if there's a team that's ever been able to do that, ever in football, like have two teams and please your whole squad. And I believe that's why the Chelsea squad are in a situation where nobody bar, let's just say Palmer, is ever like a consistent performer for you lot. It's like there's a guy that performs for 3 games, there's another guy that performs for 3 games, then he gets changed, and that guy gets changed. Don't you think that strategy is very, very confusing for the squad, rather than there should be like a normal 11 of players that are confident that they're going to play regardless of the competition? That you think
it's brave, it's definitely different to what everyone traditionally seen, which is a starting 11 with 5 on the bench or 6 players on the bench. You can compete in different positions and squad depth. But I think it can work, because what I would say with what you're saying is there's a lot of like negative side to it, which is loads of players watching other players playing the Champions League, if we make it, or Europa League or Conference League right now, and other players aren't. For me, if you're good enough, you'll stay. If you're not, you'll leave. And that should be for any club anyway. None of our clubs, regardless of the strategy, should keep players who aren't good enough. So
I agree with you, Ches, but
I don't think that's the debate here.
For example, Phil, I know you mentioned him, or someone did. If he's not performing and Esteval comes in, and someone else performs to a high level, why am I going to care?
You might care if you lose to Wolves today, for instance. So, like, if you haven't got a January window to buy and change players, and say from February onwards now, you struggle in terms of kind of beating these lower teams, but you haven't got a transfer window to just sell Madueke or sell whoever isn't performing, for instance. You haven't got a transfer window to sell. You have to deal with the players you've got now and then. But if those players are unhappy because they're not getting game time, because their contract is in the air, you are kind of vulnerable in those months where you maybe, you stay up 85th minute today, it's 1-1 against Wolves. Enzo Maresca looks at his bench. He sees Nkunku, who he knows is ticked off with him because he hasn't played him in the last games. He's looking at, Noni Madueke because he's upset because he hasn't been training well and stuff like that. Like, I can see an issue in those type of situations where he needs to pull something out the bag. But things that there's multiple issues going on in the club. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I'm just saying,
yeah. But
could there be
you know, so funny.
Dewsbury Hall started.
Those,
Dewsbury Hall started.
but one second, in the two instances you just mentioned, they both have nothing to do with what we're talking about. Because you mentioned Nkunku playing, but he isn't a striker. That's why he doesn't play. And you mentioned
so the players don't matter. I mean, the players don't matter. I'm talking about the game itself. So whoever the players, whoever's on the bench, whoever he needs to rely on. Maybe the names kind of misdirected things, but I'm just talking about in terms of in game, saying that you've got these multiple issues in terms of with your players because of the transfer strategy that you have, which isn't bad. I think it's good, but
yeah.
Say it's now February the 1st, and you've got to try and get into the Champions League in the next couple of months, but you've got multiple issues around contracts, around players not getting on with the manager because how you turn around things so quickly.
Turnover.
Do you see an issue then in terms of like maybe in terms of how to, because you can't always just go dip into the transfer window. You have to do the best of the squad that you have, and if you can't do that because of the issues that you have, do you see that being an issue? Like, do you think that's going to maybe perhaps be an obstacle for you to get into the Champions League?
Yeah, I don't know, because having said this, last season, I still think we were good enough to make it. So despite all of what we're saying, I still think our team was good enough and is good enough now to make Champions League football. Last season, we underperformed, and that's proven because from January up until now, we're like a top 3 team in the league. If you're taking the whole calendar, and even if you take the season, the last half of the season, we were very good, and the first half of this season, we were very good. That's not a coincidence. So it's like we've proven a level of consistency. This is mentality. That's why we haven't beaten big teams. That's why we haven't beaten Arsenal in a while, Man U in a while. It's not a coincidence we can't beat these teams as well. It's mentality. And better players help that mentality. Better management helps that mentality. And that's why we're hoping that Maresca can turn this around. Because 5 games isn't good enough. And that, for me, is a mentality issue. I don't think it's a quality issue. Well, to your point about the players, though, I agree. If you have loads of players disgruntled, that's going to affect the camp. But the whole point of the SDs and what they're seeing in the squad is, if we have enough quality players we believe to have a high potential, if the ones who have a poor mentality can't make it, we'll flip them anyway. But if the ones who can make it and do their bit for the team will stay.
But that's
why certain players you don't hear being linked. You don't hear.
I think what Tina's trying to say is the damage will be done by that point. No?
Yeah, so that goes both ways. If you're saying
it does.
You're gonna get flipped anyway because you're showing a poor mentality. Well, if I'm Nkunku or whatever player that you need to rely on at that moment, well, what's the point of me trying? I'm gonna get sold in the summer anyway.
But they know what they're getting into. That's the thing. They're not going in blind. They know when you sign for Chelsea, right?
Yeah.
We're not giving you crazy wages. We're not offering you guaranteed playing time. So when we're selling you the project, you know you're going to be competing with said players. So it's not like we're guaranteeing every single player. Certain players, yes. Sesko comes in, he's probably going to think, I could start. I think I can get more than 14 goals a season. Cool. Certain players, Caicedo, like that's different, the anomaly. But most players you buy are in the 20 to 50. No, you're going to be competing with said players for these positions. If you perform, cool. If you don't, you know what's on.
Are you still confident, Ches, that that's going to yield Chelsea level standards and success? Because your standards are Prems, Champions Leagues, and that consistency. Do you think that strategy is working to the best of its ability?
Working is an interesting question because we wasn't going to go from where we was to fighting for league. So that question has to be answered when we, in a few, not through years.
Let me rephrase it then. Do you feel you're progressing at the right speed to that?
Yeah, I think we're progressing fine now. I think this season's very defensive though, Terry. I will admit that. I think we don't get top 4 this season and push on from last season. We've regressed or stayed the same. That isn't good because in 3 years into our rebuild or new process, I don't like to use those words, I'm using it anyway. You can't go from like 12th, 6th to 5th. That for me is a great improvement, especially with the money spent. For me, the minimum expectation in order for it to be working, Terry, would be winning 2 cups or a cup and getting top 4. You make Champions League, the money comes in, the profile of the players goes up, the quality improves. And obviously, if you win a trophy along the way, improves mentality. Then you can push on to, cement. I guess what top 4 and whatever.
I'll just end my point. I guess what I'm saying is with the top 4 teams, I can say, for instance, top 3, top 4 teams, Arsenal, Man City, Liverpool, and I always forget the 4th team. there's a level of consistency in their squad. So you've got players that have been there maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and a consistency of manager. Hence why they're consistently getting into the Champions League fairly well. Whereas, as you've mentioned, crossing that top 6 barrier for Chelsea at the moment, top 6, top 5 barrier into the Champions League is almost like crossing the Rubicon in terms of how you're running your transfer strategy at the moment and the ripple effect I'm talking about. So I guess that's my only, it's not even a challenge really, but it's kind of an observation is, can this be the way you're kind of managing the transfer strategy and its potential ripple effect? Maybe that could be the way that the thing that is the obstacle that could prevent Chelsea from potentially. Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe
I'm naive to that. Sorry, go on, Kulene. I know you haven't said anything.
And the reason why I think it might be because typically, if a top 6 club is to spend a 1.5 billion in 2 years, their squad wouldn't be asking for more in a January or a summer, like something to bail them out. So I don't know if this strategy is the right way forward yet, and we won't know for the next couple of years. I don't believe.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say it's hard to.
Yeah,
it's 100%. Like the players, the fact is that you sign players that, as you said, are okay with being rotated, which is maybe that could be the reason that's holding you back from breaking into that top 4 and challenging to that next level. Exactly. That's why Chelsea fans are demanding certain. So here's the thing, for Terry wraps up, we speak on this a lot. The thing is that despite everything we've been saying, despite all of this, even though we're in a position where top 4 is in danger, we can all say if Chelsea had a striker this season, just a striker alone, I genuinely believe would be higher than Arsenal. If we just had Sesko, it's not inconceivable to me to say we could have won 2 of our last 5 games. So
that is true, Ches. But you could also throw in if Arsenal also had a striker, and that's where I think when you're assessing,
forget Arsenal, but this is where we'd been.
I understand that, but that's only right to a certain point if nobody else progresses and move forward. If Newcastle, for instance, keep this squad together and add 2 or 3 bits of quality, if Aston Villa keep this squad together and add 2 or 3 bits of quality, if Arsenal go and get Zubamendi, Gyökeres and Nico Williams in the summer, I don't focus too much on the names. They've also improved, and I think that's also where Chelsea fans have got to learn to be patient. Is you're behind some of these clubs or on par with them. Man United fans have got to do the same. No, everybody else isn't standing still at the same time, so it isn't just about what you do. It's and I'm defending Chelsea here by saying I don't think the last 5 games should also write off the progression that's been made so far this season as well, because they could have easily won some of those games. They were quite close as an example, and they win the next 4 or 5. Everyone will say, well, their strategy's working because they're currently 3rd and they're playing really, really well. I think there are some risks to it, and the risk with Chelsea's approach is that they're doing it in a way that has never been done in England before. So there isn't any case and points to say, well, it worked for Barca, it worked for Bayern Munich, it worked for Arsenal in the 80s, it worked for Spurs in the 70s, it worked for United in 2010. So therefore, no one knows whether this is going to work for Chelsea. And there's been a lot of peaks and troughs. A few super